Hello everyone, how are you guys doing? It's Professional here. Today I wanted to talk about a news story that I actually read the other day, and I couldn't believe how ridiculous the news story is, but get this. The Pinkertons are suing Rockstar Games over their portrayal in Red Dead Redemption 2. I'm not joking on this. I'll also have the article linked in the description down below, but for people that are confused, the Pinkertons, they're the main antagonist faction in Red Dead Redemption, and these guys, they still exist today. They are actually a real faction. These guys existed over 100 years ago in the Wild West, and they still exist to this day. Now, for people who are confused who the Pinkertons are, they were formed as a private company. They were formed as a private company to solve train robberies in the 1850s. During the American Civil War, they often served as spies for the Union side. And, they did a lot of contract work with the United States government. Now, what are the Pinkertons? Basically, they're kind of like a police force, but not entirely. They're not a police force because they're not public. They're not government-based. Back then, over 100 years ago, they were basically a private law enforcement agency. So imagine a giant corporation, like having police powers. Imagine a giant private corporation having its own police force. That's what the Pinkertons were. A lot of local governments back then, they hired them. A lot of private companies hired the Pinkertons. That's what they did back then. Today, they don't really do the law enforcement aspect that they did over 100 years ago. Today, they're more of just a security guard company, and they merged with Securitas AB, which is a Swedish security company. So they're now part of that company, but the name still exists, and they're unhappy with how they're being portrayed in Red Dead Redemption 2. And they claim, let's take a look at the article here. The Pinkertons are still around, suing over Red Dead Redemption 2. I've learned two things today. One is that publishers Take-Two find themselves in the middle of a legal battle. Famous detective villains from the 19th century's old Wild West are still around in 2019. Yeah, a lot of people actually didn't know that they are. I knew about the Pinkertons before the game came out. They're also in BioShock Infinite, but, they're not suing the developers of BioShock Infinite. So yeah, Securitas AB, they're owned by the Swedish company, as I said. I made a video about the Pinkertons. I'm not going to explain their entire history because I made a video about that. I'll have that video also linked down below if you guys want to see that. But they're asking for a cease and desist notice to Take-Two last month, asking for either a single payment or a royalty arrangement for Red Dead 2's use of the term Pinkerton throughout its story. In Red Dead 2, your gang spends almost the entire game being pursued by a pair of Pinkertons, and the agency is frequently called out by name. 2019's Pinkerton Consulting and Investigations claimed the game's use of the agency so prominently implies that it was created with the permission with the company. And Take-Two, meanwhile, argue that the use of the word is justified on the grounds of historical accuracy, since in the actual West, the Pinkertons were doing exactly what they're shown as doing in the game. They've now filed a suit of their own, seeking to have the game's Pinkerton agents declared its fair use. The publisher's suit also points that the Pinkertons are referenced throughout the media, from Deadwood to BioShock Infinite to a Weezer album that the agency also tried and failed to sue. So they've tried to sue, this is the Weezer, I'm pretty sure that's a rock band. Yeah, they've tried to sue them. They've tried to sue them because apparently they use Pinkerton in their songs. This lawsuit, I'm going to say right now, this lawsuit is not going to go anywhere because Take-Two is right here. It's under fair use, basically. Fair use under criticism. You don't really have the right. If they were trying to impersonate their company today, doing a game about their company today, they could definitely sue over that. But this is like over 100 years ago, and this is historic. This is on basis of history. This is a base of history. It's historical fiction in the game, but the Pinkertons doing exactly what they would do back then, over 100 years ago. And you know what I think? Personally, what I think is I think that there's more to this lawsuit. I think that the reason the Pinkertons are suing Rockstar Games over this, and they're suing Take-Two, is because they are unhappy with how they are portrayed in the game. They don't like that they're being portrayed as these big villains in the game. If the Pinkertons were the heroes of the game, I don't think that there would be this kind of a lawsuit from them, but I think they're just angry that their reputation is so-called being ruined from that game. But the Pinkertons, even though they're a private law enforcement agency, they were portrayed, in my opinion, very well in Red Dead Redemption 2. These were not the good guys. They were not the good guys. These guys were brutal. They were very heartless. They were very cold. All they basically cared about was money. They were acting like they were trying to stop crime, but they're basically a police agency for hire. That's what they were, a private police agency for hire, and they would work for money. That was their whole thing. They weren't part of the government. They weren't government agents. A lot of people mistake them for being government agents in the game. They're a private company. They did a lot of terrible things, and The reason the Pinkertons were out in the Wild West in the first place was because there was such a backlash against them in the East. They started out in Chicago. They were solving a bunch of train robberies. They got a prominent role during the American Civil War when they served as spies. But then after the American Civil War, what happened was with the Industrial Revolution and factories becoming larger, mass production, a lot of factory owners hired the Pinkertons to infiltrate unions because there was the workers' rights movement at that time. Conditions in factories were really bad, and these factory owners hired the Pinkertons to infiltrate these unions, gather information about them, and it would get people fired. So if you were meeting with these unions, you were a worker there, you were not under contract, they would get you fired. They would basically find out if you're meeting with these unions if you were a factory worker. They would also do really terrible things. What they would do is when there were strikes, the Pinkertons were often called in to put down the strike. And what they did was they would try to start fights. They would basically try to start fights during strikes and basically cause a riot. And the reason that they did that was so that they could discredit the workers' rights union. They were in the pocket of the factory owners, and they abused workers, and they would be the guys that would go up to you during a strike and tell you to get back to work. And if you didn't listen to them, they would beat you up. They could even possibly kill you, and they would get away with it. The Pinkertons, they did a lot of bad things, and they often got away with it. There wasn't really any Pinkerton agents charged for really bad things that they did. One of the worst things that they did was the Homestead Strike. The Homestead Strike was in Pennsylvania, and it was Andrew Carnegie and his steelworks. A lot of the workers were striking during that time, and they wanted a better wage. They wanted a better wage, and it was their union that was leading them. And what happened was Carnegie got Frick, his second, to basically put down the strike. And Frick, his idea was basically to send in the Pinkertons. That was his idea. And the Pinkertons, they came in with lever-action rifles, repeaters. They came in by boat, and the workers saw them. The workers were outraged. And then it's unknown who fired at that point, but both sides, the workers and the Pinkertons, started firing at each other, and a lot of people ended up dying during that. The Homestead Strike was absolutely bloody. And even though it's undetermined who exactly fired the first shot, you can blame the Pinkertons for that, because if the Pinkertons hadn't shown up, the workers wouldn't have been that aggravated, because the Pinkertons were those guys that were employed by the factory owners. And what happened is, after the Homestead Strike, no Pinkertons were actually charged in any killings, because they killed a lot of workers during that, shot a lot of people. Nobody was charged during that. And the public, they were so outraged and they were so angry at the Pinkertons that what happened was, due to public pressure, the government passed anti-Pinkerton laws, where they made it illegal for the Pinkertons to be contracted by the federal government. But there was loopholes in the law, because they could still be contracted by state governments, they could still be contracted by local governments. They just couldn't work for the federal government. And because of the backlash in the East, a lot of states, they also passed their own individual laws. Ohio, for instance, banned the Pinkertons from ever setting foot in the state. So they completely kicked them out of the state. And the Pinkertons, they were a really large force. They had 30,000 agents, and they were bigger than the United States Army at that time. That's how big the Pinkertons were. They went out west because of when they were chased out of the East, they were chased out of the cities by all the people that were really angry at them. They went out west, where there was newly formed states, or there wasn't states still. And there was a lot of towns and a lot of, private companies that needed the Pinkertons, and, they would hire them to protect their assets. They would hire them to protect their banks, their train stations. They would also be hired to go after outlaws. They were hired to go after outlaws. And, that happens in the game. You had Pinkerton outlaw hunters. Those guys existed, and they were brutal. They didn't care who they hurted back then. They went after one outlaw, Jesse James, and when they went after Jesse James, what happened was his mother, Zerelda, she was there, and she was there with Jesse James' half-brother. No, I think his stepbrother. And what happened was, the Pinkertons, they were so outraged that Jesse James wasn't there, they threw some kind of explosive device in the window, most likely dynamite. It blew off his mother's arm and killed his brother. So they killed, and the brother, he was 8 years old, so they basically murdered a child. And nobody got charged with that. Nobody got charged with that. The Pinkertons would often get away with this. They would do just horrible things. And the way that they're portrayed in Red Dead Redemption is perfect. I absolutely liked it. I knew who the Pinkertons were before the game, and I thought that Rockstar Games did a really good job at researching the Pinkertons and doing it, and they clearly showed, while Dutch's gang weren't the good guys, the Pinkertons definitely weren't the good guys. They were absolutely terrible people as well, and the game does an absolute amazing job at portraying them. And now these guys, they're pissed off that they're being portrayed in that fashion. They're pissed off that they're portrayed like that in the game. You can't do that. This is a work of historical fiction. It's like If the Pinkertons can sue Take-Two and Rockstar for nonsense like this, how many other, how many other companies or like, relatives of like ancestors that are like portrayed in like historical games, like how many other people could sue? It's just nonsense. This is based off of history. It's based off of history. And this is not going to go anywhere. Just like Take-Two said, it's declared as fair use. And honestly, this is making even worse rep for the Pinkertons, that they're trying to get involved in this. Like I said earlier, they're probably pissed off that they're portrayed in just such a bad light. But, I mean, that's exactly what they did. If they didn't want to be portrayed in such a bad light, then I guess their ancestors from over 100 years ago shouldn't have done those horrible things. But that's how the Pinkertons were. And, we should be very grateful, especially if you're an American viewer watching, you should be very grateful that the Pinkertons failed, that they basically failed to become a giant police force, because that's what they were aiming for. They were aiming for becoming this giant statewide police force. They would be all over the U.S., and they would be employed by the federal government. Eventually, it failed due to public outrage, and, we have the police force that we have now. A public police force, it's not perfect. I understand that there's bad things that still happen, there's bad cops everywhere, but, if we had the Pinkertons as our police force, they'd be a private police force, so your taxpayers' money wouldn't fund it, and there would be just disaster. Like, imagine a large, giant corporation being your police force. Imagine how scary that would be versus a public police force. So I'm very grateful as an American that the Pinkertons failed, and we don't have to deal with these guys today, and because of their failures, they transferred from being a private law enforcement agency to going to become a security guard company with Securitas AB, where they are today. But this lawsuit, it's just stupid, it's nonsense, and it's not going to go anywhere. And if you guys want to check out my entire video on the Pinkertons, make sure you check that out. I just didn't want to go into their entire history because I made a video about that, but I'll link that video down below. I'll also link this article. Let me know, what do you guys think of this? What do you guys think of this? Do you agree with me? Do you agree with their lawsuit? I don't think a lot of people are going to agree with this lawsuit. I don't think it's going to go anywhere. So many people have tried to sue Rockstar Games for like being supposedly portrayed in their games, and it's just always ended in failure. I don't think anybody's really ever won a lawsuit against Take-Two and Rockstar. And I keep saying Rockstar. It's mostly Take-Two because that's their publisher, but Rockstar, I say that because they're the developers of the game. So let me know what you guys think down below. If you enjoyed the video, drop a like. If you're new to my channel and enjoy my content, subscribe. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care, everyone.